the Rifcord podcast.
So I've got family and friends in the U.S. who are going to watch this. Let's impress them and let them know what types of actors' names come out of Second City.
Well, let's specifically talk about Toronto first, because we have been creating amazing artists that have excelled in film and television, not only in front of the camera, but behind the camera. So we talk about Canadian alumni. Right now, currently, Lauren Ash on Superstore is a Toronto alumni who eventually went to the Chicago cast and put up some shows there. She's an incredible writer and performer, great comic timing. Was in a very dramatic theater school that was just not her jam. She quit theater school and went right over to Second City to train. And in a really short period of time, she was on our main stage. So she is really a superstar and will continue to be throughout her career. Of course, on that same cast is Mark McKinney from The Kids in the Hall, who did spend some time on our stages. So also an alumni. And of course, the famous improviser Colin Mockery came out of Toronto, still lives in Toronto and Leaside with his lovely wife, Deb McGrath, who's also a Second City alumni.
Colin Mockery is a Second City guy. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah, and in fact, he was in the same cast with Ryan Stiles. Because Ryan Stiles, originally from Washington, joined the Second City family for Expo 86. We had a cast that was permanently located on that site. And it was Colin and Gary Jones, who later became a star of Stargate. He was the scientist on Stargate for 10 seasons. Still a good friend of mine. Then so Ryan, Colin, Jonesy, Pat McKenna was also a star in that cast, and here in London and Toronto, and still a very good friend of mine and a member of my comedy troupe, the Yes Men. We're still performing, doing some old guy shows around town, having a blast. So those are just some of the names. Of course, obviously, Gilda Radner, who was here in Toronto doing Godspell in 1972 and was scooped up by Andrew Alexander, along with Eugene Levy and Martin Short. They joined the original cast. Dan Aykroyd, John Candy. These are all people that came out of Toronto over the years. Of course, Mike Myers started as a kid who loved Second City, grew up in Scarborough. He and I were roommates on the road when we were both in the tour company. Here was this old guy joining the comedy troupe with this 19-year-old phenom who was just destined to be a star. That was his every thought, was to become a star. And of course, he did several times over. Catherine O'Hara, still knocking it out of the park and getting all sorts of accolades all these years later, was an understudy for Gilda. And was working the box office and went into the cast when Gilda couldn't do a show. It could be because she knew it from front to back, having seen it so much, and never left the cast. Really, really quite wonderful. Andrea Martin, Dave Thomas, who was friends of Ben Gordon, very famous writer, producer, director, comic. They were both copywriters in advertising. They hadn't improvised before, but Ben was so quick. And he says, hey, my pal, copywriter, he's really funny. So he brought Dave Thomas over. Pardon me. Still got that cough that went around. Yeah. And those two guys were killing it on the stage early on. And then later, obviously, Dave Thomas went over to SCTV. Even if we talk about people like Tony Rosato, an amazing talent, born in Italy. And to this day, he was the first ever SNL cast member to have been born outside the USA.
You're listening to the Rifcord podcast.